An 8.
An 8. All right, John, with your dice roll of 8, the topic we'll be discussing today is, how do you make dungeons more adventurous? I'm excited about this one. I don't know if I added this one or not, but it's a question I've pestered a lot of you guys about over the last year, so...
Hello and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about running tabletop role-playing games. My name is Chris Salzman.
My name is Andy Rao. And today we're joined by not one, but two guests. We have a fan favorite and returning guest, John Corey. And
I didn't know I was a fan favorite. That's exciting.
And for at least the first couple of minutes of the show, we have a special guest, and that is my son. And the reason my son is on the show is not just because he's cute and awesome, but because this week, while we were all trapped indoors with a pandemic situation going on, he ran his first game of Dungeons & Dragons for me. And it sort of happened kind of unexpectedly. I didn't even realize he was going to do it. I thought we were going to be playing a little dungeon board game, but it turned out to be a full-blown role-playing session. So we have a couple questions for the youngest GM here, and then... and then we can continue on with our discussion about making dungeons more adventurous. So, Son, I guess, is it best practice to avoid using
yes,
first name?
Okay, yeah.
Son, you ran a dungeon for me a couple of days ago, and did you have fun running it?
Yeah.
Okay. So, why don't you describe how you put the dungeon together? Like, what did you use to actually build the dungeon?
Well, I used this board game called Rumble in the Dungeon, like the set thing.
Yep.
I didn't actually play the normal game, so I just added whatever I wanted, pretty much.
Yeah, we have this game. We have this board game called Rumble in the Dungeon, and it's got these really nicely drawn little dungeon tiles you can, lay down to make a little dungeon map. And I don't think we've had it for years, and I don't think we've ever played it by the actual rules. We just do improv stuff with the dungeon tiles. So
we have never played with the rules.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I have two questions for you about your gaming experience. First of all, you are way younger than I was when I started playing D&D. Yeah. And I'm sort of like the old dude on this show who's always talking about the old days when I was running games. So my first question for you is, what was your favorite monster or sort of scene that you put in the dungeon, and like what made it so fun for you to run?
Well, I'm not really sure what it's actually called, but it's like this skeletal like sorcerer that floats around and has like a crown floating above it. I'm not really sure what it actually is called, but
I think if you were to look up that monster in the Dungeons & Dragons monster manual, it would be called a lich. Because it's sort of like a skeleton wizard. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what made that, what was weird or fun about that fight?
My dad kept on hitting the force field that was around it.
I
did. for some reason. And didn't know that the crown that was not in the force field was the powered source.
Yeah. It went on for embarrassingly long as I repeatedly attacked the thing's force field.
Not as long as the gelatinous cube.
That's true.
That at least took 3 hours.
That's true. So why don't you tell us about one other encounter that you ran?
Well, the gelatinous cube, like I just said.
Okay. And what was cool about the gelatinous cube? What did it take me forever to figure out I needed to do to beat it?
Slam it into the wall with the shields.
Yep. What did I? What are the things I tried first that didn't work? Do you remember?
He tried to trick it and make it fall into the lava, but it didn't work.
I did. Yeah. You can't really trick gelatinous cubes. It turns out they don't have the intellect to be tricked.
Mm-hmm. Instead, it turned into pretty much a rock, and it was just a hopping rock. I
finally figured out I could bash it with a sort of shield charge into the wall and break it into lots of little gelatinous cubes. So
yeah.
All right. Well, would you run another dungeon, Alden?
Yeah.
You had a fun time with it? Okay. Well, I would like you to make another dungeon for me. So, hey, thanks for coming on the show, buddy. And now I have bad news for you.
What?
It's time for bed.
Meh.
Yeah. Okay.
Well.
So, thank you for being on the show, and see you tomorrow. Okay.
Yeah.
You keep running games, maybe we can have you back on as a guest. Thanks, bud.
So the real big bad is bedtime.
Yeah, it really is, and there's really no defeating.
That'll be the villain at the end of his next. It'll be a giant bed with stories and
All right, well, John and Chris, thank you for indulging me and my son there, and the listening
that was
audience.
fantastic.
Thank you. So yeah.
As a man whose family just thinks he's a huge nerd, I always admire the fact that your family. I think your daughter plays in an online game with her friends, right? And your son is the world's youngest game master, so
That's exactly right. And you're showing evidence of maybe having listened to episodes of the show, which is a little concerning. That's why you're a favorite.
Yeah,
so.
That's right. Because I not only am on the show, I listen to it, which is
indeed. So, hey, real quick before we jump into the topic, what have you guys been up to? You just heard my most exciting gaming news. What have you guys been up to gaming-wise, either role-playing-wise, or if you haven't done any RPG gaming, what else have you been up to in the last week or two?
Yeah, I had my family and I have been playing a lot of games, but again, they're not huge nerds, so we've been playing a lot of Clue, some Monopoly, all that kind of good stuff. So that's been all right. As far as my online gaming or my role-playing games, I played a game of Night Witches over the course of the last 2 weeks, which was really fun.
Nice.
I had a friend who just volunteered to run it, and so I gave it a shot, and it was pretty great. It was my first... I don't love online gaming, and I don't love gaming when I'm not the game master. So it was sort of two strikes against it, but it ended up going great. I think the key to it for me was having short sessions. The sessions were 2 hours each, and we did it 2 hours one day and then 2 hours the next week. And that worked great, and we had fun, and our squadron did not all die in flames, though I was the snitch, so I snitched a couple times to the political officer. If you don't know what Night Witches is, it's a game where you play Russian airwomen in the Second World War bombing German positions, and I was the zealot who kept snitching on everybody to the political officer. It was kind of fun.
That sounds great. Is it self-contained enough that it's just a 2-session and that's done, or are you going to keep playing?
Yeah, I think, we had so much fun we might play again, but we don't have anything scheduled, so we'll see.
Did that game, is it divided into sort of stuff that takes place in like air combat and then some sort of stuff that takes place on the ground, like interactions between the different pilots?
Yeah, so it's powered by the Apocalypse, like Dungeon World and Apocalypse World and Monster of the Week. It's specifically got 2 sets of moves. There's day moves and there's night moves, with all apologies to Bob Seger. But so during the day you do things like scrounge for parts or fuel, or you interact with people, you size up the new pilots, you sort of do sort of interaction kind of stuff, and then the night is taken up by, getting your mission and doing bombing runs and all that kind of stuff, and then the debrief, which can always be exciting depending on what happens.
That sounds nice. Tachyon Squadron, a game for the Fate Core rule set, has been on my playlist for quite a while, and it definitely sounds like it might have been somewhat inspired by Night Witches, just to the structure that it follows. But yeah. Chris, how about you? What have you been up to the last week?
Yeah.
Let's see. I ran a D&D session after our last episode that went pretty well. I am finally actually, I think, at the last session. It's going to be the next one. So I've been saying this for the past 6 or 7 sessions, but I think this one for real, the big bad evil guy showed up on top of a giant black dragon in front of his castle, her castle. So I don't think there's any way that it can stretch out longer, but I'm, players, so we'll see.
I don't know.
They'll do everything they can, I'm sure.
Can you move the action into space? Like that might up the cool level. So
yeah. I do not want to give away what I'm going to do. I will tell you two after, because I do have a question about if it's an awesome idea or an eye rolly idea. I think it's awesome, but we'll see. And then
it could be both. I just want to say, like a good dad joke. It could be both eye-rolly and awesome.
Which honestly is sort of my GM style, so I think we might be hitting the right track there.
Are you the living dad joke of GM?
Pretty much. I have had to say a couple times at the table, that joke was just for me, which is never a good sign. So.
That's awesome.
Yeah, other than that, though, I've been playing a lot of, as much as I can, Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is just a big, dumb, lovely, glorious video game, which is what we all need right now. So,
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, good for you. So, hey, shall we jump into the topic?
Please, yes.
All right, so I'll go ahead and frame this one because this is a topic I've asked on like our Discord and probably on previous episodes. But I noticed a couple of years ago, while I was playing, I think, one of the Tomb Raider or the Uncharted games. Those are video games where you go through a lot of like dungeon-y environments of the sort that D&D players might take their characters through. Except,
Right.
but I was noticing that the dungeons I was running in Dungeons & Dragons and other games were quite a bit less thrilling and adventure feeling than the games I was playing in Tomb Raider. Or if you think about Indiana Jones, he's going through that dungeon at the beginning of the first movie, and he's navigating traps and things like that. It's just very exciting. There's a lot of running and collapsing things. And sometimes it felt like, by contrast, the ancient tombs that my players were exploring were being played out more like sort of a slow-moving, tactical, room-by-room combat scenario where they're,
almost as if they were playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Exactly. I mean, they're moving slowly, checking for traps the whole way. Every time they meet a door, it's 10 minutes of preparing to breach through the door, and that's all very fun. So I don't want to bag on that, because that is a very Dungeons and Dragons sort of experience. But it is also very far from like the kinds of dungeon experiences we see in movies and video games. And so, I guess my question, and I think at least part of the vibe beneath this topic, is how can we make our D&D dungeons feel a little bit more dynamic and adventurous, and capture that wonder of exploring an ancient lost tomb that is lost sometimes when we get overly tactical with our adventures. So I'm just going to throw that out there, and I guess, John, do you have a quick gut response to that?
I do, and I think that actually it speaks to why I don't play much Dungeons and Dragons anymore. Why I would rather play something that encourages a little more spontaneity, like Dungeon World. And I know I keep harping on that, but I'm sure I'll find another game that I like as much. But I find if I do less prep, and there's less of a sort of prepared environment, then there's more opportunities for spontaneity. The other side of that, of course, is that often you crash and burn, and it doesn't go well. Yeah. So, it's not that there's no prep, but my gut is you do it by making it not only spontaneous for the players, but spontaneous for yourself. And I have some other ideas about techniques you can use, but that's sort of my big.
Yeah, I want to circle back on some things you just said, but first, let's get your quick response to the question. Are your dungeons adventurous, or are they or not?
Oh, maximally adventurous.
Maximum adventure. Okay.
Yeah.
And you play Dungeons and Dragons, so obviously it can be done.
Yeah, they're sometimes they are, and I will tell you what. Most of the time when they are, it's because I start ignoring rules and stuff is just happening.
Yes.
So ignoring rules and then starting to do stuff that's a little bit more time-based rather than movement-based, if that makes sense. So it's like, this rock is falling, what are you going to do? You have 2 seconds to decide. Those sorts of things, rather than like, you enter a room, how are you going to tactically, set yourself up? Like that. It's like, it's almost like the more detail you give, the less interesting it is as far as on the adventure spectrum, the adventure to tactic spectrum. So
now, Chris, you've started us down a dangerous road, because once you start asking dangerous questions like, why do I need all these rules? Like, there's really only one place that ends, and it's with like playing My Life with Master, or maybe just giving up the hobby entirely. I think. So.
No, I think it ends with you having to buy my my RPG on DM's Guild.
Yes, I think that we need to make our own. We'll make our own Powered by the Apocalypse Heartbreaker.
Yes.
It won't be a D&D Heartbreaker. It'll be a Dungeon World Heartbreaker.
I have a couple of quick follow-up questions to those things. So, when you guys have run dungeons that felt adventurous, and by dungeons I don't just mean underground labyrinths, but that sort of scene. When it has felt that way, what was going on that made it feel that way? What are the characteristics of a good adventurous dungeon?
Yeah.
Well, I think one big thing is that it contains things you don't expect. And more precisely, things the players don't expect. So, if you set them to go into the ruined tower, and there's a dungeon underneath the tower, and there's a legend that there's going to be a sorcerer there, to find the either the sorcerer himself or the lich reanimated sorcerer can be fun, but it's also exactly what that adventure is expecting. So you can play with that type and say, maybe it's a thriving community of goblins who are actually helping the environment. And I don't know, they have to, the players, the adventure they thought they were getting into is not the adventure they're getting into. I think that's one thing that helps.
Yeah, I've actually, I ran I'll call it a dungeon, but it was more of a setting where some players were fighting this boss that had a little bit of control over time, like time and physics a bit. And that was a fun thing to play with, so they entered into this, it was basically just like a shimmering globe, right? So they enter in, and then everything inside of there just reacted a little bit differently. So they could jump higher, and their arrows flew a little bit more slowly, things like that, where it's just, they kept on having to second guess what they thought was going to happen all the time. And that one was really fun for me to run. I don't know if it was fun to play, but it felt like more adventurous.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, so then all of a sudden they could do stuff like, there's these rocks that are 30 feet up, but everybody can jump up that high, right? So all of a sudden everybody's just jumping around like crazy and doing all sorts of cool stunts like that. Again, right, ignoring the rules.
Right. Yeah. That's a good idea.
I've noticed if you look at movies and video games that have these tropes of, exploring tombs and stuff, what's interesting to me is there is often, at some point in the exploration, some kind of time limit gets imposed. And in movies, this is almost always, at some point, the facility will start to collapse. Or, the ground will start to shake and boulders start falling down. And
the warp core is going to explode.
And sort of the goal of the heroes shifts from getting down here into this dungeon to do whatever we want to getting back out before it collapses on us. And that's not really ever something I've done. Doing timed stuff has always felt sort of intimidating to me. Chris, you mentioned that you give players like very tightly timed decision points. Can you talk a little bit about how you use time pressure?
Yeah, so sometimes it's as simple as saying, you have one action, essentially, before this bad thing happens. Tell me how you get out of it, or, the whole dungeon is collapsing. So that physics, time-based thing that I was just talking about, after they killed the bad guy, right, the whole thing started to collapse. So then they have to figure out, how do they get off this giant rock that's floating in the sky? How do they do that quickly and, get down to the ground and stuff? So it led to some fun moments there. And then another thing that I've been doing more recently is just stealing the clocks from Blades in the Dark. Right. Yeah. So you draw a little clock for I want this thing to happen, at some point. I don't need to give it hit points. I just need to say, in 4 or 5 things, this is going to happen. 4 or 5 actions, 4 or 5 something else happens, then this thing happens. And that's a neat way to sort of track it yourself, so you don't forget that you have this idea percolating, but then also to give sort of a timing to it as well.
Right, and you can do that by also having not predictions, but you can insinuate that things are getting worse without, and you don't even need to do it directly. But that's one thing you can do. I also like to do, in every movie you've ever seen, not every movie, every pulpy action movie you've ever seen. I do not believe this happened in Remains of the Dead. But if you were to say, okay, we've got to get off this base, and oh no, the warp core is going to explode. So what you always have is at least two things going on. And this is always something that I target, is to say, okay, you've got to fight a big bad guy, but there's some other pressure acting on you. That's often time, but maybe it's the collapsing fortress. Maybe it's one of your comrades has gone into a coma and is getting worse by the second, like something. So I think it's important, because often I think when they're non-adventurous, it's like, okay, we're going to go into the dungeon, we have all the time we want, and then we know we're gonna find the boss at the end. And not that can't be fun, but if you don't have a second stressor on their decision making, then then there's less pressure.
Yeah.
Some people don't like my games because I try to put on a lot of pressure.
Do you always try to give them? Is there always a way out to sort of do everything perfectly, or are you always like ready to take something away?
I'm always ready to take something away, but I also believe in fail forward. So if they screw up, it'll be bad, but it doesn't mean it's the end of the road. Like I think you have to eliminate not that characters can't die or fail, but you have to remove the binary failure to get what I'm going for, which doesn't mean you can't play Dungeons and Dragons. It just means you change how you play it a little bit.
So, do you guys? So one of the big tropes you see in this sort of film and video game is the puzzle, and it's usually some sort of environmental puzzle. In video games, it involves moving blocks or pushing pillars or something like that. And in movies, it might be looking at the code or the runes or whatever and putting them in the correct order. Do you guys? I know for a lot of people, the thought of like dungeon puzzles makes them wince a little bit because they can be unfun experiences. Do you guys do those sorts of dungeon puzzles? And if not, like, how do you capture that sort of experience?
I do not generally make puzzles with a planned solution. I may create a puzzle, and then I sort of. This is really cheating, and some people refuse to play this way. Yeah. When they come up with a solution that they think is pretty cool, I'm like, yep, that sounds good.
Awesome.
So I one time, and I don't know if I told this the last time I was on, I spent like an hour coming up with the perfect puzzle for my math genius sorcerer, and it took him 3 seconds to solve, and I was like, I'm not good at this.
Yeah.
Chris, have you ever sprung like a classic dungeon puzzle on a party?
No, mostly because I don't feel confident that I could create one that's very good.
Yeah.
But I'll do stuff that's more like observations, if that makes sense. Like, can you? If you look around, you observe this thing that's going to give you a clue about what you're about to find. So I'd never do and this lock has 5 combinations, and you need to find the different keys.
I'd like you to play Myst real quick here while we wait. Yeah.
I mean, which would be fine by me, but it's coming up with those puzzles, which is the hard part.
Yeah.
So my GM Matt Wilson, he does a really good job of this. So he will actually have like prop sort of puzzles that he puts out on the table, and those are really fun to go through. Although it's happened a couple times where he has some sort of cipher that he's found, and like there's a bunch of nerds at his table who are just like, oh, I know that cipher.
Well, that's Kryptonian, just like Superman.
Yeah. Know your audience. Yeah.
Can I tell a quick story? This was really a fortuitous roll on the table. Earlier today, I was on a walk with my daughter, and we were on a path in the woods, and we had to step to the side because there were some other people coming. So we stepped off of the path into some leaves and startled a nest of snakes.
Oh my goodness!
Today, so all of a sudden, these like 5 gardener snakes. Right, these things are tiny. They're 12 to 18 inches long or something. Just like flew out of the leaves. A couple of them poke their heads out to see what we're doing, and it was just this moment of like terror, and then all of a sudden we were just fascinated, and like we got down on our knees and looking at these snakes and everything. And it was just this moment in a day that was otherwise pretty normal that felt very adventurous, and all we did was startle like a couple snakes. I've been thinking about it since then, like even before we rolled this, just like what about that was so charming and so like adrenaline racing, right? It's like, because it's not like these were a danger to us at all. It was something about the surprise of it and the novelty of it too that I think was really really interesting. Yeah, it just made me think, it's like, we're always like throwing these big scary monsters at our players, but like, I think we've talked about this before, but a normal animal would probably be very scary to an actual human if it was intent on rampaging towards them, right? So
even if it just surprises you, I once almost had a heart attack over a groundhog when I was walking in the woods because it just made a huge noise. I was like,
yeah, you're just like, you're a big tough hero at that moment.
Right.
That's interesting. Yeah, so maybe attention to some of those more mundane like surprises or minor dangers.
Yeah, because you'd mentioned Tomb Raider, and I feel like in Tomb Raider you're often fighting like tigers. And
you're eradicating the wildlife of an entire continent.
So maybe there's some other problems, but but you're not fighting like mutant tigers, right? You're fighting like
you're not fighting a dragon, right?
Yeah.
So another thing that appears in a lot of D&D dungeons, but the experience of it is different, I feel, than it is in these sort of cinematic movies, is traps. Do your dungeons tend to be heavily loaded down with traps? And how do you... what happens when a trap goes off or the party notices that there's a trap? How do you guys proceed?
Well, I do traps. I do traps. And
in real life as well.
I like them, and I tend to keep them simple, right? So they could be solved, but I also like it to be a chance. If they fail, the consequences need to be real. So one example is I just had this trap. It was actually one of my favorite convention stories, right? So it was this trap, and if they stepped on a plate, it was going to release these two automatons. But they saw it, and they got around it, and at my table were two 12-year-olds, and as they successfully solved this trap, they sort of looked at each other, and they were getting kind of bored, and one looked at me and goes, I'm going to go back, I'm going to sneak back, I'm the rogue, and I'm going to trigger that trap. I'm like, really? He's like, yes. I'm like, it's on. So the consequence of that was extreme, though. The wizard didn't know it was happening, and then suddenly the automaton has him by the throat, and he's holding him in the air. Because I think to make it adventurous and to make traps exciting, they've got to be about something other than hit points. They've got to be about a real consequence to the adventure.
Yeah, like you slip and you take falling damage. Great. But like if you slip and fall into a hole, that takes you somewhere else, right? That's very interesting.
Yes, exactly.
I have trouble with traps because I find that they bring out the most methodical, tactical problem solving in most groups I play with. If there's a pressure plate or something like that, you can be sure in games, a lot of games I run, that the action will come screeching to a halt as everybody breaks out their 10-foot poles, and they set up very elaborate ways of removing any excitement or danger that trap once had is removed after a team of engineers has been carefully insulating themselves from it for 10 minutes. Whereas Indiana Jones just stares at it intently and then tries to leap over it, right? But a D&D party will stop and break out their equipment and stuff like that. Do you guys have that problem, or is that just me?
Oh, no. Okay. I have that. I mean, I don't know if it's a problem, though. I guess
it's and by problem, I mean, it is his own type of fun, but yeah.
Yeah, it does. It grinds the action down to a halt. Because, part of it is the novelty. I'm going down this hallway, and all of a sudden I see a stone that is different, right? I want to tell me about that stone that is different. Oh, well, it triggers a trap and all that. Yeah, so I mean, I think there is sort of that tactical thing that comes out of it. The thing that I always struggle with is how much time, how much do you allow them to sort of tinker with it, right? So this is the classic D&D problem. It's do you let everybody in the party roll for that thing? Yes. You just give one person advantage because they're all staring at it, that sort of stuff. Which is why, if I can, I like to introduce some sort of secondary sort of trap that's associated with it, so you can kind of split the party so they're both trying to figure things out at the same time.
It's that classic D&D problem of like, if there's no time constraints and the rules don't really stop you from doing it, what's to stop the party wizard? What's to stop everybody from rolling 300 times until they finally pick the lock or whatever?
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you, Chris.
I think that's why you need a time constraint to make traps work. I think you need one there too. The other thing I do is often I'll, one of the things in Dungeon World or in a Powered by the Apocalypse game is that if they fail a roll, this is one of my favorite things to do, I just go, yep, it went off fine. Because one of the things you can do is sort of hold that against them later. So if you can if you want to take a hard move against them, it doesn't have to be in the moment. So, an hour later I'll be like, and you spring a trap. And there's no investigation, there's nothing, it just happens. And then it becomes, and the trap is not a problem for the person it's getting sprung on, it's the problem for everybody else, like Chris's example of falling through a hole, right? Now the party's got to go get you. And that's the real adventure. Yeah.
Interesting. Chris, did I cut you off earlier? Did you want to keep going on what you were talking about? You were talking about how you try to introduce sort of a second pressure on people when they get a little bit too sluggish. Go ahead.
Yeah, so one way I might approach that, so if there's a pressure plate on the ground, right? Like you can set it up so as soon as they investigate it, they realize that pressure plate is actually attached to a second one that's down the hallway, right? Like, because again, you got to remember, like, just because you have your map sort of drawn, it doesn't mean that it's the truth. Like you can change it, right? Like, so I mean, I think just like introducing sort of secondary elements to it in any way, especially if it's something that like has some sort of story significance too, right? Like if it's something that you want them to either trigger or otherwise. Yeah, just make it a little bit more interesting. But yeah, I tend to not like traps that are just like, well, you didn't investigate those stairs before you went down them, so now you've taken falling damage. It just seems like, well, you're just setting them up to always be wary of stairs. Which might be fun, but it's like, that's not really as
you don't want to be the gotcha GM, at least not too much, because it reinforces bad instincts that are not going to be fun.
It makes them more cautious, right?
I'm trying to think of the Indiana Jones movies. How often does he just trigger a trap that isn't like super obviously a trap, right? Like it's always feels like he's going through these stages where it's like it's very clear that he's going to have to surmount some sort of challenge that's in front of him, right? When he gets to it, and that's kind of like right. He wouldn't just stumble into a pressure plate that shoots him. Right, like it's just it would be very clear, like the hallway would be lit in such a way that he knows that there's something going on.
But one thing that is true, but he also ends up setting off the traps a lot, right?
Yeah, he does, or his dad sets them up for him, which is always fun.
It rarely, I guess, I can think of one or two instances like where he kind of disables a trap like that ancient light-based trap, that famous one. But generally speaking, like he might see the trap and stuff like that, but he's going to end up like diving through the flying spears, at some point, right? Because like he never finds a switch and just like stops them from going off, right? Or maybe I'm misremembering that.
No,
I think you're onto something, which is okay. This isn't a trap you can disable, but you can get around it, using various skills, and that is more adventurous than unhooking the tripwire, right? If you know that the trap is a chomping blade that you have to roll on your dex to avoid, and that's the way you get around it. It's not that you can turn it off. I think that's more adventurous than just, here's a switch.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I think like I'm thinking about it, and he just stumbles into all those. Like he sees it coming and it hits him.
If you think in the third movie, there's this trap. He's in and he's doing his final trials to get to the Holy Grail or whatever, and there's this one sequence where it's those spinning blades that all pop out and stuff. Like a D&D party would throw stuff in there and measure where the blades were and stuff like that. But Indy just runs in and trusts that he's going to be able to instinctively dodge these things, right?
But you know what he does? That's such a good example. So he's got to roll on his dex, right, to succeed. Once he gets through, he can disable the trap for everybody else,
true.
which is what he does. So So in order to disable the trap, you have to do something adventurous first, I think is the lesson there.
Yeah.
Man, I feel that was a little mind blowing there. I feel like I just learned something cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I need.
Andy was about to make some argument that Indiana Jones is actually not a hero, but
That's right.
No, hell no.
I'm just trying to think. Like every party I know would be, they would be trying to seal off the openings that the blades came through. I don't know. It would be fun in its way, but it would not be. No one would end up dodging the blades. I guess. Anyway, that's a cool thing, and it would also give somebody really the chance to shine. Whoever has the skills most relevant for doing the adventurous thing. Okay.
Yeah. Well, we should probably wrap it right there. We've been going for a little bit, and I think now we all just want to go watch Indiana Jones.
I know, that is absolutely. And when we're done here, I should go to bed, but I'm going to see where I can find Indiana Jones. But yeah.
Can I throw in two tips that I always use personally to make my adventures more exciting? One is the not too much planning, which I won't harp on too much. But the other one is, and I don't think we do this enough because I don't want to make it sound like I'm a method actor because that's not what I do. But what I do like to do right before I GM is to consume pulpy material, right? Whether it's Indiana Jones or Conan the Barbarian, or I actually for a couple sessions I was watching Aliens, like the really stressful part of Aliens, because it puts you in the mood of propulsive action, right? So if you're in that mood, you're more likely to offer it to your players. So that's one thing I like to do. And I think that's the big thing I like to do. And again, I like to give them stuff they can't avoid without doing something. They can't just switch it off. They have to engage in some adventurous activity to do it. Fill their lives with adventure because that's what they're there for. Yeah. So, yeah.
That's really good.
I honestly, if I take one thing away from this, John, it's that insight that, you can disable it, but you'll have to do something that's not just like sit here and make a lockpick check. You're going to have to someone's going to have to scramble up there to get to the lever, or someone's going to have,
dive through the swinging blade or do something. And once they're through, maybe they can let the rest.
Yeah, because that's the fun part. You don't need to watch the wizard fumble, his dexterity roll.
Right.
You do kind of need to see that.
And also, and you can't. The person who does it can't be the character of the player who's not there. That's the other reason.
Oh, that's perfect.
Well, that's really good. I think so. Let's call it. John, thank you so much for coming on. This was super good.
I love coming on this podcast.
We love having you on. You're a great guest. So thanks for taking some time out of your life. I don't know if are you finding yourself more busy, or are you finding yourself with lots of extra time in this time of pandemic?
Lots of extra time, because my kids do their schoolwork during the day, I do my work, and there's no errands to run, there's no soccer practice to go to, there's no rehearsal to pick my daughter up from, so soccer practice is online, it's 25 minutes, he does it in the driveway.
Oh, man.
So,
There are many ways we are all adapting to this situation. That's amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's strange.
All right, well, good discussion, guys.
All right, well, I've been Chris Salzman.
I've been Andy Rao.
Again, thank you, John.
Thank you.
Remember, if your players are having fun, you're a great GM.